What's up, and welcome to Two Brothers and a Shot of Milk. That's right, don't adjust your screen. We are missing one, Lawrence St. Victor, but we still got Christopher St. Victor, Richard Wilson, and Jack Walker Pearson. And today we are talking about made up imaginary facts. And what I want to know is which ones are important and why. I mean, some of these characters, some of our favorite characters, have been around for almost a century, and they have changed and they have evolved. So these made-up imaginary facts have also changed and evolved over time. I want to know, in another 100 years from now, which ones do you want to see sticking around? What's important to you?
So, first of all, how dare you argue these imaginary facts that we just made up?
Hey, man.
I mean, so for me, my first thing has to be secret identities. They need to stay, and I feel like, especially when they get away from it sometimes, but it makes so much sense that if you have a superpower or if you do all this stuff, a secret identity makes so much sense.
Right.
And, Marvel kind of plays fast and loose with secret identities, but I think they got to stick around. They got to stay. And I hate it when, every once in a while, get a couple of years, something will happen and some big hero will be like, oh, I'm going to do a reveal and everyone's going to know who I am. They always end up reverting back to how it was before. So,
Well, Lawrence brought that up a few podcasts ago when he was talking about the Superman comic where Superman came out to the Earth, the masses, and said, "Hey, I'm Clark Kent." And I mean, how outrageous. I mean, sometimes no knock at the writer of that. He's written other stuff I like, but that kind of choice is so ridiculous because I think of comic lines where the whole point of having a secret identity wasn't even for the selfish reason of I want to have some kind of life. It was if that reality is known, then I put everyone who have ever come in contact with in my life in jeopardy.
right.
And I remember when the first Iron Man movie came out, and at the end of that, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. says, "I'm Iron Man," and I was like,
Why?
"What?
Yep.
What?" It was so like I was like, oh, I guess we're just doing that. Yeah, it's an interesting secret identities.
So, I'm going to take something from not imaginary, but real life. A guy won the lotto. In certain states, if you win the lotto, you need to reveal yourself or you have to be there physically to sign for the check in a public press conference.
Yeah,
This guy won, I don't know how many millions of dollars it was. He went in with gloves and the mask from Scream on TV because he didn't want anyone to know that he won that money. So you're telling me just money caused him to have essentially a secret identity. If
right.
you have powers, you're taking down deadly bad guys. It makes so much sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'll go with that. Well, even I mean, the whole point of Civil War was largely this Registration Act, where they were trying to government enforce no more secret identities.
Right.
And what a compelling comic storyline, which let's not talk about how they use the title in the movie, but that whole point of secret identities. What I mean, yeah, I co-sign on that. That is a made up imaginary fact that I think is worth observing.
Yep.
I'll tell you one I like with Batman.
Go ahead.
I like him not using guns. And we've seen different versions of Batman's where he has used guns over, since the 1930s. But made up imaginary fact, I like it when it's his code not to touch a gun specifically.
I agree. I think it forces him to be, first of all, forces him to have more gadgets because he just can't have guns, and it brings more depth. So eh, for me, it has nothing to do with the fact that he doesn't like guns. It just forces Batman to be more creative in the solutions that he uses, and it shows more gadgets and more gear. And gear and gadgets are awesome. So I co-sign no guns for Batman.
Rich, you got
Sure.
any?
I mean, I'm a little bit out of my depth on this one. plot armor, right? Everyone has it, even in anime.
Actually,
No, no,
that's actually
wait,
no,
hold
that's
on.
actually a pretty good point though, Rich.
I mean,
Because go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, I was gonna ask, Superman still doesn't kill people, right?
Well, so that's another one of mine, made up imaginary facts. If you want to be an asshole, and you would be an asshole, this is coming from me, go ahead, quote me on this, and you want
Mhm.
to say, Superman kills, and you're like, yeah, okay. There have been instances in the comics since 1938 where Superman was first introduced, and then all this stuff happened in the 50s and 40s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and 2020s. And there's such a plethora of content from such a mass majority of people who have written the stuff, and they've done Elseworld stuff, and they've been one-off stuff, and yes, Superman has killed in the comics. But made up imaginary fact that I think is worth hanging my hat on: Superman doesn't kill. It's his
That's what I was
code.
gonna say.
And
He
when you
sticks.
cross that threshold, it's almost defamation of the character. And yet there are assholes out there that want to say, but he's killed in the comic, and Batman's used guns in the comic, and you're like, yeah, but what's the broad stroke thing where when you
Right.
cross that threshold, you start losing the character? Superman doesn't kill.
Can I push back on something like that? So we're talking about Superman not killing and how you're an asshole if you kind of take it out of it. But Elseworld stories is something that I want to keep
I
because
I agree.
I like it when you take these imaginary facts and
Yes,
change something so critical about a character's about critical about the character, but it's just in a self-contained story. So then you feel okay with accepting the fact that Superman lands in Russia, or a story like The Nail, where Clark and Martha run over a nail, and because they get a flat tire, they never pick up Superman, and Superman goes somewhere else. So taking stories like that and having this self-contained one-off thing, the whole What If series, I like stuff like that, and I would like that to stay because it's good seeing the characters you love envisioned in a different scenario and a different with different influences, but not affecting the core character himself.
I 100% agree with that. Um, we would be remiss to lose things like our one shots and our what if series.
Yep.
But my issue is when those kind of obscure storylines start becoming the mainstream, and the mainstream narrative for me is when that thing gets turned into a film.
Doctor Strange.
Yes, you get to pull from whatever source material you want to, but in most cases what we're seeing isn't a what if, with the exception of obviously the what if cartoon. We're not seeing what if stories brought to life. We're just seeing what they're saying is the story. Right. And so I think there's a different kind of responsibility that has to be towed when you're presenting that as, and I'm kind of talking about Superman because that's the one that, I'm most kind of like vehement about. But we
Right.
see it happen all throughout the thing. We saw it happen with Constantine when Keanu Reeves played the part,
Mm.
and the Constantine diehards are like, he's American? What? And he's got black hair? Who is this guy?
So
It's not John Constantine. You know what
let
I
me
mean?
ask you this: how much of the facts can you bend with still preserving the the imaginary facts that are established?
Right. Well, we're talking about the integrity of the character, right?
Right. That's true.
Because look at in the Sandman series, John Constantine is Joanna Constantine. They completely just turned the character into a female version of it. But I'd
Yeah.
say the content of the character, the heartbeat of that character wasn't actually lost. It was adapted well for what they needed to do given the circumstances, and why not have a female Constantine? And in fact, I would say that female version of Constantine might have actually been more faithful to the character than the Keanu Reeves version of the Constantine.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
But yeah,
although most people probably had an easier time seeing a guy with dark hair than they did seeing a lady with boobs.
I mean, I prefer most of my ladies with boobs, to be fair, though. So,
I mean,
But no judgment.
don't we all? But yeah, so Superman should not like just keeping that kill. No, I say if Superman has to kill, he goes out of his way to try not to, and does
Mhm.
everything he can before it gets to that point. And usually, it's like he had no choice but to, or like it just the fight went so bad and so left. He ended up killing the guy.
Well, go back and check out the his fight with Doomsday is such a great example of this. He's essentially fighting a mindless monster that is
right.
destroying everything in its path, and not just destroying, decimating and murdering everything in its path. And the few panels right before Superman kills Doomsday, and Doomsday subsequently kills Superman, he pulls off to Lois for a moment. He's got that an aside, and he says, I'm paraphrasing entirely, but he basically speaks to the nature of how it goes against everything he stands for, but he has to put him down, and he has to do it now.
Yeah.
And so you go, whoa, man. Of course, this is a monster without the concept of right and wrong or morality. It's just destroying everything, and he still sees it as a sentient being that
So,
shouldn't just be snuffed out.
so
And it costs him something.
where does the line get drawn on the killing? Because we see that with Batman too. Batman will kill parademons and stuff like that, and it doesn't really feel like killing. You know, I guess
Well, content does that. They give you guppies and foot soldiers all the time.
right,
Yeah.
right. But even though, because I remember, I remember reading the death of Superman, and I don't think him killing Doomsday, even without that acknowledgement, like I have to put him down. I don't, because Doomsday was always billed as a mindless killing machine.
Right.
So
Right.
why? I don't think it'll go against his code for him to.
But that's why it mattered so much more in
Right.
understanding. Not just trying to focus on Superman, but in understanding that element of Superman, that even a mindless thing, it cost him something to kill.
Yeah.
Then you take someone like Zod, and you go, well, this isn't a mindless thing. This is one of the last surviving Kryptonians who has a soul and a conscience, and he's speaking a language I understand, and he's got his own moral compass that maybe I don't agree with, but to kill him has to cost me something. And we know that should be true because it cost him something to come to terms with the fact that he had to kill Doomsday, which was a mindless thing.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm not saying is that our superheroes should never kill. I think that's maybe unrealistic. But what I am saying is that it should never be a cheap choice. And that for me, and you've heard me talk about that before, for me, that's a hard, that's a made up imaginary fact that I think is worth preserving.
And plot armor, because if we didn't have plot armor, Superman would never came back to life, right? Am I right? Am I right?
Well, I mean, they found a pretty good way of bringing him back. They essentially just said, well, he's a solar battery and he needed to charge him back up. Plot armor has done a lot for a lot of characters over the time.
But
A lot of
sometimes, you know
characters
what?
in every genre.
No, but the plot armor, prep time, all that stuff, it's necessary to put your characters in these crazy scenarios, but give them an out to come back. So I think that's a good point, Rich. I think it's good because you got to have that, because sometimes you want something that they always, whenever sales get low, they always bill a crazy event that's going to shake up the universe. So without that plot armor, you can't have those crazy events, because then some of your most profitable IPs are going to be over, and so you got to have that. So, and I appreciate that too, because then you can see it and breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, Bruce Wayne's gonna come back as Batman. It's not gonna be this guy, or I know Superman's not gonna be dead forever. He's gonna come back. So, but yeah, we need that plot armor. I agree. We need that because It just gives us that wink, wink. Okay, I feel I can accept this story because I know in the future I'm going to get what I'm used to.
But now let me ask you too. When Superman died, did you think he was coming back?
Oh yeah, and I was
We
just a kid. Yeah,
well, I didn't. No, man. I mean, I'll say this though: when Superman died,
Mhm.
a whole year went by or more in comic books before we ever got him back. It wasn't like Jon Snow, where Jon Snow died and literally comes back the next episode,
Yeah.
albeit, yes, there was a season break, but it's literally the next episode. Talk about not earning a death or him coming back. Superman, when Superman died, it made national news.
it did.
Yeah.
And then before we ever got Superman back, there was a whole slew of comics about the absence of Superman. And then there was a whole slew of comics about these 4 Superman that had popped up using his namesake but weren't Superman. And then after that, after a year had gone by, they brought back Superman in a black suit who had no superpowers.
Yeah.
And he was using a gun, blaster guns. And he's like,
Yeah.
listen, I got no powers, but we got work to do, and I'm back. Let's
He
go.
had like
And
a
you're like,
jetpack or something like that.
jetpack. I was
Yeah,
like,
Yeah.
I got like the hair. I was like so emotional reading that because I was like, it highlighted so well what Superman was for me. And it transcended the costume and it transcended the powers. It was like, this is a guy who, regardless, was going to try to do the right thing and protect people. And I was like, wow, man, I was a Superman fan before, but now I'm like, these guys understand him.
Jack.
Superman.
Do you remember when that happened? I remember arguing with Lawrence specifically, like who of the 4 Superman could be the real Superman? Because at one point, when they were
Yes.
having that, they were trying to lead you to believe that one of
Yes.
these 4 guys are like Superman. But we all knew it wasn't John Henry Irons because.
Well, well,
but
Yo,
but
Superman's death was so iconic. It like my father, he got me into somewhat collecting comics. He would take us to the comic book shops and whatnot.
we're back
But
exchange.
yeah,
Yep.
but it was so iconic that when Superman died, my dad got the comic, like the big thick jammy, and I would
Mhm.
read it like but carefully, not trying to bend it. And then even when he came back, I have that comic somewhere in one of these boxes where he came back in that robot. That robot was just like mysteriously walking at the bottom
Yep.
of the ocean. Like I drew a
Mhm.
picture of that too. I was like laying down on the ground drawing a picture on the big sketchbook. But yeah, I remember when he came back and he just like the way he came back was hilarious to me because he kind of just came out of the cod piece of the robot and just spilled
Yep.
out in like
Yeah.
liquid. It was for me, I thought it was hilarious. Clearly, y'all didn't think it was because y'all no one's laughing but me. It was funny. Okay.
I'll say this
But
though, the death of Superman, as far as comics were concerned, was probably as iconic and game changing as was when Superman first hit the scenes in the 1930.
I
Because
think more.
what happened after Superman hit debuted in 1938, Batman showed up on the scene a year later, and we know via documentation that Superman had been in the works for like 6 to 8 years before he finally was in a newspaper form, and then in the comics later. Batman was fast tracked that year after the success of Superman. And then there was a whole slew of comic book characters that were fast tracked because, yo, man, this is catching. After the death of Superman, we had Batman had his back broken. Then we had Green Lantern went insane and turned into Parallax. We had all this all these storylines that started capitalizing on the success that was the death of Superman, flipping this content. You know,
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's why the death of Superman. I know we're kind of getting off, but the death of Superman was
derailed.
derailed. But it's good. No, but it makes a lot of sense. So, death of Superman was really kind of the first of its kind of that scale.
Yeah,
So now you see it. They do it all the time now. But at the time, it was the first. You're seeing something that you thought would never ever happen. I mean, if you had told anyone in the '90s that Superman, like the biggest superhero ever, was gonna die, you'd be like, "No way, no freaking
yeah,
way! It's Superman. It's not gonna let Superman die." And they did seemingly for a little bit of time, and it was crazy.
And they did, yeah. Well, and like I said, what worked so well about it is they committed to it.
Right.
They committed to him being gone, and you felt him gone. And that's a really interesting time for comic books when it's like Gotham Knight, man. I was buying Superman comic books that had no Superman in it.
Right.
But I was like, what is going on, man?
Let me
This
pull
is
those. I have it right
crazy.
here on the shelf. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm gonna pull it off the shelf.
Yeah, it's nuts. That comic is probably in like really horrible condition. I was not, I guess, kind to my comics as you were, Jack.
No, but you know, the Superman comic books haven't really appreciated well over time because because it was such a large event and they were so mass produced. The 90s, the late 80s and 90s was kind of the season of greed for collectors. So there's just so many of them that were made. I mean,
that's why those '90s comics aren't worth that much because everything was a special edition, and everyone was trying to everybody was collecting them. So
unless I mean some of the Spider-Mans, there are a handful of comics that are a couple $1,000s or so, but largely most of the stuff in the 90s aren't ridiculously valuable.
I gotta go through mine.
I have it in trade. I know I can't. I just can't find it fast enough. What I did pull was off the shelf was Nightfall. That was another. It was pretty much the Batman equivalent, where Batman has his back broken. But I wanted to show the panel that you were speaking about before, Jack, because I thought that was a really good point. But now, right when we end the podcast, well, I'll find it like that. But now that we're talking about it, I can't find it anywhere.
Well, I'm looking at it right there on my shelf specifically, but I'm not going to go get it.
Right.
But it's right there. I should send you a picture of my shelf. They're all categorized with like dividers and stuff. And that one's the Death of Superman run.
I'm just lucky that I have all my books on a shelf as opposed to organizing them. But yeah.
Well, in closing, hardcore, made up, imaginary facts. They matter?
Yeah.
Absolutely, they do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it gives us the rules that the world has to play by. We're in an imaginary world, and we need to know what can fly in that world and what can't fly in that world. And without that, it grounds the stories, right? Because without it, then anything can happen anytime, and even though it can still, because it's just imaginary. But
which isn't to say evolution doesn't matter, because again, like I said, some of those early day Batman comic books, he's certainly not the Batman we know and love today, so specifically.
Purple
And
gloves,
so
baby.
we don't want to not leave room for growth, and we don't want to not leave room for exploration. But when you start messing with the moral code of these characters, that's maybe, for me, when you've crossed the line. Now, leave my made-up imaginary facts alone.
Right. When you lose the essence of what the character is, I don't care if you mess with sometimes gender, sometimes race, but when you actually change the core of who this character is, then all of a sudden you don't have that character anymore. You have something totally different, and don't try and sell me this character as something else when it's not.
Right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our talk on made-up imaginary facts. If you want to see the whole episode, you can check us out on our podcast, which is Three Brothas and a Shot of Milk, which is on pretty much all podcast streaming platforms at this point. We're on YouTube, right? This is YouTube. So click the link, subscribe, like, comment. And we're on Instagram and I think TikTok and all those other platforms, dropping content all day, every day. So come by and say hi. Join the conversation. We'd love for you to get involved.
Then we would.
Peace.
Peace.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to Three Brothers and a Shot of Milk.